Ballet 58 School of the Arts presents Pilgrim's Progress. The City of Destruction. Pilgrim's Progress begins in the City of Destruction, where a man, Christian by name, is under great conviction and also feels the weight of a heavy burden on his back. He has learned from the book of the King of the Celestial City that his home city, that of destruction, will soon be burned with fire from heaven. Evangelist meets Christian and urges him to flee with haste. Christian is unable to persuade his wife and children of the impending destruction. Just the opposite, his family becomes more and more convinced that he has lost his mind. Christian sets out along with Evangelist, who has been instructed him regarding the way to the gate that leads to the narrow road in the Celestial City. Christian is not long on his way when he comes to the Swamp of Despond. He unwittingly falls in and is nearly overwhelmed by the mud, the weight of the burden upon his back, and in his mind by fearful, despairing thoughts of his children back in the City of Destruction.
The Village of Morality. At last, coming out of the Swamp of Despond, Christian continues on his way and comes to the Village of Morality. This village is filled with many pilgrims who, on their way to the Celestial City, have stayed for a rest and never left. The mayor of this palace, Mr. Worldly Wise, and his girlfriend, Ignorance, tell of an easy way to loosen the burdens of pilgrims by merely imitating the example of the king and living a moral life.
The Gate and the Narrow Road. At last, Christian comes to the gate, just as Evangelist promised. Goodwill answers Christian's knock. After hearing what Christian had come, Goodwill sees Christian through the gate and walks a little with him, pointing out the path that leads to the house of the interpreter. The interpreter welcomes Christian and gives him instructions for his journey. Christian is to stay on the narrow road, and importantly, he is not to take advice from strangers, lest he could get lost and end up wandering in circles. The interpreter also gives him the key of promise, which can unlock any door. Not long after beginning his journey, Christian comes to a place where the narrow road and the wide road intertwine. He is greeted by Evangelist, and they again meet Worldly Wise and Ignorance. It is not the good things you do that can release the burden from your back, Evangelist reminds Christian. Mr. Worldly Wise may think that he can rid pilgrims of their burdens, but don't be fooled by his attractive speech and promises. There is a way that appears to be right, but in the end it leads to death.
The Hill of Redemption. Continuing on the narrow road, Christian comes to the Hill of Redemption. He climbs upon the steep path, not without difficulty, due to the burden upon his back. The path is fenced in on both sides by a wall called Salvation. Nearing the top, Christian sees a cross. As he draws near to the cross, the burden on his back loosens and falls off. 3 shining ones then come, greeting Christian, with peace to you. The first tells him your sins are forgiven. The second gives him new clothes to put on instead of the rags he was wearing. The third places a mark upon Christian's forehead and gives him a certificate, which he should present at the gate of the Celestial City.
The Palace Beautiful. Going forth from the Hill of Redemption, Christian begins his journey on the narrow road in earnest. Already growing weary from the journey, he hears rumors of the dangers ahead. Just then, he lifts up his eyes and sees a stately place, the Palace Beautiful. Upon entering, Christian learns that it was built by the king in order to provide pilgrims rest and encouragement on their way.
The Valley of Humiliation. After finding much strength and blessing at the Palace Beautiful, Christian again sets out on the way. He soon comes to the Valley of Humiliation. Here, Christian sees a foul enemy coming over the field to meet him, called Apollyon. Apollyon, Christian learns, is the prince of the City of Destruction, and he insists that Christian is one of the subjects. As far as the monster is concerned, Christian shall not be permitted to flee any farther. Christian stands his ground, vowing his allegiance to the king. After a terrible conflict, and with Christian reciting many of the promises made by the king in his book, Christian deals a fatal blow to Apollyon with the Sword of Truth, which had been given to him at Palace Beautiful.
The Valley of the Shadow of Death. Coming out of the Valley of Humiliation, Christian finds himself walking directly into another, this one called the Valley of the Shadow of Death. The road here is increasingly narrow. with deep pits and grave dangers on either side. In the middle of the valley is the mouth of hell. As Christian walks, lion-like demons come up beside him, whispering lies into his ears. Finally, Christian hears a clear voice, as if going before him, saying, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." This gives him great courage and resolve. Christian meets his friend Faithful, who is ahead of him on the journey.
Vanity Fair. Christian and Faithful find that in order to continue on the narrow road, they must walk through Vanity Fair. This wondrous attraction was, as Evangelist warns, set up by Apollyon as a trap for pilgrims traveling to the Celestial City. In it is for sale every kind of merchandise, including pearls, silver, gold, and other goods, as well as honors, titles, kingdoms, and any other means of vain importance one can imagine. Lady Demos is worshipped openly by the acrobats and entertainers as the god of Vanity Fair. Faithful refuses to bow down to the mirror and the idolater of the fair, and also keeps Christian from bowing down. She is burned at the stake for her faith in the king. Christian sees the shining ones come and take Faithful to the celestial gate. He leaves the fair with great sadness, but he meets Hopeful, a fellow pilgrim on the way to the celestial city.
The Doubting Castle. As Christian and Hopeful continue on the narrow road, night falls and they become lost. They then meet two giants who invite the pilgrims inside their castle for a feast. Christian and Hopeful accept the invitation, seeing that they will not be able to find their way back to the path until morning. Little do they know that the names of the giants are Despair and Diffidence, and that they are entering the Doubting Castle. The giants try to convince the pilgrims that the journey is hopeless and that the celestial city is only imaginary. The giants then suggest that the pilgrims may as well take their own lives. Continuing to pray for strength, Christian and Hopeful refuse. Finally, Christian remembers that he has, in his pocket, the key of promise, which can open any door. Christian uses the key to unlock the door of the castle, and he and Hopeful narrowly escape and return to the narrow road.
Crossing the Great River in the land of Beulah. On the shores of the Great River, Christian and Hopeful once again meet Mr. Worldly Wise and Ignorance, who tease them for traveling on the narrow road. Mr. Worldly Wise claims that the wide road is much easier to travel, and that it leads to the same destination. Christian and Hopeful turn their attention to the river, which is very wide and deep and has no bridge over it. The depth of the water is deeper or shallower, depending on one's faith in the king of the city. Seeing that they have come very near to the celestial city, Christian and Hopeful step into the water. Christian at this point becomes very discouraged, thinking that he will not make it to the other side, but Hopeful encourages him.
The Celestial City. Finally, Christian, Evangelist, and Hopeful come to the Celestial Gate. They present their certificates, and the Shining Ones welcome them into the safety and prosperity of the city. Many fellow pilgrims are there as well, including their dear friend Faithful. Mr. Worldly Wise and Ignorance also come up to the gate. They do not have a certificate since they did not visit the Hill of Redemption, and they are turned away. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you're excited for Pilgrim's Progress 2021.